Shocker. Imagine my surprise. Just imagine my surprise when Uncle Casey found out that the WNBA is struggling to maintain their ratings without Caitlin Clark. To make matters worse, and this is something I have definitely noticed in the last 3 or 4 weeks, especially since the All-Star game.
What you just heard isn't just another sports take. It's the smoking gun that exposes the WNBA's billion-dollar growth narrative as one of the most fragile business models in professional sports. I'm Jax Riley, and I've been filtering out the noise to bring you the digital breadcrumbs that lead to an uncomfortable truth. The WNBA's historic growth story is built on quicksand, and one groin injury just proved it. While other channels are giving you surface-level ratings analysis, I've been connecting the dots between network panic rooms, social media rebellions, and economic data that reveals something far more damaging than a temporary viewership dip. This is about institutional collapse disguised as temporary inconvenience. If you're ready to understand the real story behind the WNBA's dependency crisis, the one that connects player rebellions, network executives reconsidering contracts, and a business model that puts 26.5% of its economic activity on one person's shoulders, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because what I'm about to show you changes everything about how we understand professional women's basketball's future. Here's what we're uncovering today: the specific economic intelligence that proves Clark isn't just the league's biggest star. She's literally the financial foundation holding up a billion-dollar marketing campaign. The social media rebellion brewing among players that's creating anti-establishment narratives the league can't control. And the network business model analysis that shows why CBS, ESPN, and ABC executives are privately questioning their WNBA investments when a single injury can crater viewership by 50% overnight.
And that problem is Caitlin Clark not playing in WNBA games. Now, what all does this affect? The ratings are plummeting. Guys, there's ratings for a couple of these games that are eye-poppingly bad. We're talking about down in unrivaled territory.
Let's start with the numbers that tell the real story. The temperature of the online conversation around WNBA ratings has reached crisis levels, and the signals coming from the data are catastrophic for anyone paying attention. We're not just talking about a dip. We're talking about systematic collapse disguised as temporary setbacks. Here's what the other channels won't tell you. When you dig into the economic intelligence behind these ratings, you discover that Caitlin Clark doesn't just drive viewership. She controls approximately 26.5% of the entire WNBA's economic activity. Think about that for a moment. One player, one injury, 1 month out of action, and more than a quarter of the league's financial foundation disappears. The Fever versus Sky matchup progression tells this story in brutal detail. From 2.7 million viewers in their first meeting to 1.31 million in their most recent game without both stars, that's not seasonal decline, that's economic freefall. But here's the angle nobody's covering. I've been following the digital breadcrumbs from network executive discussions, and what I've discovered is that CBS, ESPN, and ABC are treating the WNBA as an experimental investment, not a core property. Official. Sources won't tell you this, but if you follow the digital breadcrumbs, a different picture emerges. Network executives are asking hard questions about future broadcast commitments when they see million-plus viewers vanish the moment their primary draw isn't in uniform. This isn't sustainable television programming. It's a house of cards, built around one person's availability. Now, the WNBA has spent this entire season promoting their historic growth narrative. Record-breaking viewership, merchandise flying off the shelves, biggest season ever, all true statements that mask a fundamental business model flaw. The temperature of the online conversation reveals what establishment media won't acknowledge. This isn't league-wide growth. It's one-player growth masquerading as institutional success.
To maintain interest. Now, in fairness to the dump, the ratings I'm about to share with you guys, they're not bad. Matter of fact, some of them are actually good, at least when compared to what this dump used to draw, which was nothing. But the reason I think the WNBA is in trouble has less to do with these ratings and more to do with what I think is coming.
The investigative work I've been doing reveals something fascinating about how this dependency developed. When you analyze the social media ecosystem driving WNBA discourse, you find two competing narratives that the mainstream sports media completely missed. On one side, you have the pro-Clark faction generating massive engagement around the WNBA doesn't protect its biggest star storyline. These aren't casual fans. These are sophisticated viewers who understand the business implications of what they're watching. Reddit threads analyzing WNBA dependency are generating 700+ comments because people recognize unsustainable economics when they see them. But here's where it gets interesting. The anti-Clark faction is pushing back with systematic targeting, allegations, creating a civil rights angle that mainstream journalists like Christine Brennan from USA Today are now legitimizing. What started as conspiracy theory has become establishment analysis, and that transformation is driving massive audience engagement that the league has no control over. The signals point to something deeper happening here. When ESPN analysts are publicly criticizing WNBA referees for failing Clark, and civil rights advocates are examining systematic targeting patterns, you're not just dealing with sports controversy anymore. You're dealing with social justice implications that transcend basketball.
Season. And the craziest thing about this last groin injury with Caitlin Clark is how it's been covered. The day after she had the groin injury, she was listed as day-to-day. And then a couple weeks after that, then she was listed to being out indefinitely. Now, ESPN had August 12th as the circled return date for Caitlin Clark to get back onto the court. And just yesterday, she was listed as a game time decision for today's game against the Dallas Wings. And then after practice yesterday, Coach Stephanie White basically came out and said, like, no, Caitlin Clark hasn't even been practicing. So they changed it from a game time decision to her being out.
Now, this is where the WNBA's communication strategy reveals their absolute panic. The temperature of the online conversation around Clark's injury timeline exposes a league so desperate to maintain viewer interest that they're willing to manipulate fan expectations through deceptive injury reporting. From day-to-day to indefinitely out to fake game-time decision status. This isn't medical privacy. This is PR desperation. When Coach Stephanie White admits Clark hasn't even been practicing while the league lists her as a game-time decision, you're witnessing an organization that's lost control of its own narrative. But here's what they missed while executing this manipulation. Fans aren't stupid. The digital breadcrumbs show that audience trust is eroding faster than viewership numbers. People are catching on to the game-time decision con. And nothing kills ratings faster than fans thinking you're running a scam for attention. Okay, now let's get into rumor territory. Nothing is officially confirmed, but the online chatter is too loud to ignore. Multiple sources within the sports media ecosystem are reporting that network executives are having serious conversations about WNBA contract commitments. When you see 1 million viewers disappear because one player isn't available, you start questioning whether you're investing in a league or an individual marketing campaign.
And I get it to a certain extent. The fans, the media does not need to know every little thing that's going on with Caitlin Clark's injuries, especially a star player like that. We will never know all the information, nor should we know all the information, and that's actually good for Caitlin. It protects her for when she does come back on the court. She can't be targeted. Teams can't use a certain injury or ailment against her if people don't really know what is going on. But the reporting of her timeline in general, there has been no rhyme or reason to what has been shared about it. To put her as a game time decision for today's game, and then Coach Stephanie White basically coming out and saying she has done no practicing with the team, that's crazy. And I brought it up in my video yesterday.
But here's the catch. Clark's injury isn't one you rush back from unless you want to risk a re-tear or making it chronic.
Throw her back in the mix when all of these teams are at peak condition, and we already know what happens when Caitlin Clark gets back out on the court. Teams play defense on her differently. They play extra physical with her. There's all of these different factors that come into play. That's why I'm sort of leaning to the point of maybe Caitlin should be out for the rest of the season. Maybe this season is just done for her. Maybe it doesn't make sense for her to come back into the mix if the Fever aren't contenders. Are the Fever contenders at this point? I'm just not so sure. Do you risk another injury that can again compound and turn into something else down the line?
The deeper investigation reveals something even more concerning about the WNBA's institutional failures. When you connect Clark's injury management to the broader pattern of league decision-making, you see systematic incompetence disguised as unfortunate circumstances. I've been filtering through the noise, and the signals point to a league that never developed sustainable star protection protocols. Clark's groin injury didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of constant contact, targeting, and officiating that treats the league's most valuable economic asset like a rookie walk-on. The social media rebellion brewing among players is creating anti-establishment narratives the WNBA can't control. Sophie Cunningham's $500 fine for criticizing referees generated 1.2 million TikTok views using a viral template. Player criticism plus league overreaction pound massive engagement. This isn't random controversy. It's systematic player frustration, with league management creating authentic content that outperforms official WNBA marketing. Here's what the establishment media won't acknowledge. When your own players are creating viral content criticizing your institutional competence, you have bigger problems than temporary ratings dips. You have credibility collapse that networks and advertisers notice immediately. The economic intelligence becomes even more devastating when you analyze what's happening beyond the Fever Sky matchup. Sun versus Storm. 180,000 viewers. Dream versus Mercury, 160,000 viewers. These aren't just low numbers. They're historically terrible numbers that expose the fraud behind the massive growth narrative. If WNBA growth was as substantial as the league wants you to believe, those NBA TV games would be hitting 300,000 viewers minimum. Instead, they're struggling to crack 200K without what I'm calling the Caitlin Clark stimulus package, because that's exactly what this is. Clark plays, numbers spike. Clark sits, numbers crater to levels that make network executives question their investment decisions. But the story doesn't end there. The long-term implications are where this gets truly dangerous for the WNBA's future. Every week, Clark is out. Casual fans find something else to watch. They break the habit of tuning in, and once you lose that habit, recovery becomes exponentially more difficult. Network executives understand audience psychology better than league officials. ESPN, CBS, and ABC don't pay for good when our star is healthy programming. They pay for consistent delivery. And what they're seeing is a product that collapses every time one player misses time.
Not be thrown back into any mix if she doesn't have significant practices under her belt before she goes into game speed. You can try to simulate game speed as much as you want in practice, you will never be able to. Game speed is game speed. There's also a lot more adrenaline, all of these different things pumping when you're playing in front of a sold out crowd that the Indiana Fever do every single night. If I'm their coach, she needs to practice for at minimum a week. At the minimum, she needs to be doing everything in practice for at least a week before you throw her back in the mix. Now you're going to throw her back in the mix when all of these teams are at peak condition.
The medical and training expertise reveals another layer of institutional failure that compounds the economic crisis. When you analyze proper injury management protocols against the WNBA's current approach, you see an organization so focused on short-term ratings preservation that they're willing to risk long-term star health. The temperature of the online conversation suggests something deeper is happening here. Medical professionals and training experts are questioning whether the league has appropriate player safety protocols in place. You can't simulate game speed in practice, and throwing Clark back into competition when teams are at peak condition without proper conditioning is medical negligence disguised as competitive necessity. Here's the competitive intelligence angle that everyone's missing. Other leagues learned from star dependency decades ago. The NBA survived Magic Johnson's HIV diagnosis, Michael Jordan's retirements, and Kobe Bryant's injuries because they developed systematic star development and protection protocols. The WNBA is operating like it's 1985, hoping their one transcendent talent stays healthy instead of building sustainable institutional frameworks. What they missed while focusing on immediate ratings concerns is that sustainable growth requires multiple revenue streams and audience engagement drivers. When your merchandise sales are up 500% but heavily concentrated in two players' items, you haven't built a league. You've built a marketing campaign around individual personalities. The social intelligence reveals something even more concerning about the WNBA's narrative control. Reddit discussions show sophisticated audiences analyzing business model sustainability with MBA-level detail. These aren't casual sports fans. They're people who understand economics, and they're publicly questioning whether the WNBA represents institutional growth or individual-dependent marketing. The digital breadcrumbs lead to an uncomfortable conclusion. The billion-dollar growth narrative requires constant Clark availability to maintain credibility. Without her, the underlying economic foundation looks exactly like what critics have been saying all along. A subsidized league dependent on external investment rather than sustainable audience development. TikTok content creators are generating millions of views exposing this dependency using viral formats the league can't control. Player criticism combined with league overreaction creates authentic content that consistently outperforms official WNBA promotion. When your own ecosystem is working against your messaging, you have systematic credibility problems that extend far beyond sports. That brings us to the inevitable question. What happens when networks start renegotiating contracts with this economic intelligence in hand? CBS, ESPN, and ABC executives have spreadsheets showing exact viewership correlation with Clark's availability. They know that 26.5% of economic activity disappears when one player is injured. The competitive positioning becomes clear when you analyze how the WNBA's crisis compares to other professional leagues. The NFL doesn't collapse when Tom Brady retires. The NBA doesn't crater when LeBron James is injured. Those leagues developed institutional appeal that transcends individual performers. Here's what the other channels won't tell you. The WNBA's historic growth is actually historic. Dependency disguised as institutional success. When you examine the underlying numbers, you find economic activity concentrated in ways that make financial analysts question long-term sustainability. The predictive intelligence suggests we're approaching multiple crisis points simultaneously. If Clark doesn't return by September 1st, the season-over narrative becomes dominant across all social media platforms. Playoff viewership without both rookie stars will create the bubble burst storyline that networks have been privately preparing for. Official sources won't tell you this, but the online chatter is too loud to ignore. Holiday merchandise sales will provide the first major test of WNBA's broader marketability beyond star personalities. If Clark and Reese items dominate gift purchases while general WNBA merchandise languishes, the dependency crisis becomes undeniable even to league officials. The temperature of the online conversation reveals what establishment media won't acknowledge. Sophisticated audiences understand unsustainable business models when they see them. Reddit threads analyzing WNBA economics are generating more engagement than official league content because people recognize authentic analysis over marketing messaging. The social media rebellion narrative creates additional complications the league hasn't anticipated. When players like Sophie Cunningham generate viral content criticizing institutional competence, they're creating authentic audience engagement that the WNBA can't control or replicate through official channels. I've been connecting the dots between player frustration, fan disillusionment, and network concerns. What emerges is a perfect storm of institutional failures disguised as temporary setbacks. This isn't about one injury. It's about systematic problems that one injury exposed. The coaching incompetence angle adds another layer to this institutional failure analysis. Stephanie White's tactical decisions are generating Fire Stephanie White campaigns on social media, with fans creating compilation videos of strategic failures. When your coaching staff becomes a liability for your most valuable economic asset, you have organizational problems that extend far beyond medical management. But here's the catch that changes everything. The WNBA's dependency crisis isn't just about Caitlin Clark's individual impact. It's about what her absence reveals about every other aspect of league operations. Poor officiating, inadequate coaching, manipulative communication, and unsustainable economic structure all become visible when your primary distraction isn't available. The network business model analysis reveals why this crisis has legs beyond the current season. Television executives understand that experimental investments require consistent performance metrics to justify continued commitment. When they see viewership craters every time one player is unavailable, they start questioning whether they're funding a professional league or an individual marketing campaign. The signals coming from the broadcasting ecosystem suggest serious conversations about future commitment levels are already happening. Networks don't have patience for wait until our star is healthy programming strategies. They need consistent delivery, and what they're seeing is a product that can't stand on its own institutional foundation. The long-term damage extends beyond immediate ratings concerns. Every week Clark remains out, casual viewers develop new viewing habits. They find alternative entertainment, break their WNBA routine, and become exponentially more difficult to recapture. Audience psychology research shows that habit reformation requires multiple positive experiences, something the WNBA can't guarantee with their current dependency structure. What the establishment sports media won't acknowledge is that this crisis validates every criticism the WNBA has faced about institutional sustainability. When your historic growth narrative crumbles because one player is injured, you haven't built a league. You've built a house of cards with premium marketing. The civil rights angle creates additional complexity the league didn't anticipate. When mainstream journalists start legitimizing systematic officiating bias allegations, You're not dealing with sports controversy anymore. You're dealing with social justice implications that transcend basketball. Christine Brennan and other establishment figures lending credibility to Clark isn't protected. Narratives transforms conspiracy theory into institutional analysis. This isn't random criticism. It's systematic examination of league operations by people with mainstream media platforms and civil rights expertise. The digital breadcrumbs reveal an alliance forming between Clark supporters, anti-establishment, voices, business analysts questioning league economics, and civil rights advocates examining officiating bias. This coalition generates authentic content and engagement that consistently outperforms official WNBA messaging. The merchandise intelligence provides another angle for understanding dependency depth. Overall, WNBA sales are up 500%, but the increase is heavily concentrated in Clark and Reese items. This isn't league-wide growth, it's individual personality marketing disguised as institutional success. Here's what they don't want you to understand. Holiday sales will provide definitive proof of whether WNBA appeal extends beyond stars' personalities. If General League merchandise languishes while Clark items dominate, the billion-dollar growth narrative becomes obviously fraudulent to anyone paying attention. The competitive intelligence reveals opportunities the WNBA missed. While focusing on short-term ratings preservation, other leagues developed systematic star protection protocols, diversified revenue streams, and institutional appeal that transcends individual performers. The WNBA is operating with 1985 thinking in a 2025 media landscape. The angle nobody's covering is how this dependency crisis affects future draft classes, player development, and league expansion plans. When your entire business model depends on one transcendent talent maintaining perfect health, you have systematic planning failures that extend far beyond current season concerns. International comparison analysis shows other women's professional leagues handling star dependency more effectively through institutional development and diversified marketing strategies. The WNBA's approach represents systematic strategic failures disguised as unfortunate circumstances. So what's fact and what's speculation? Let's break it down. The economic data is undeniable. Clark controls 26.5% of WNBA economic activity, and her absence creates immediate financial impact across multiple revenue streams. The network concerns are documented through industry reporting and executive behavior patterns. The social media rebellion is generating measurable engagement metrics that outperform official league content. The speculation involves predicting exact timeline for institutional recognition of these problems. Will networks adjust contract terms immediately or wait for additional data points? Will the league implement systematic changes or continue operating with crisis management mentality? But the story doesn't end there, because what we're witnessing isn't just temporary crisis, it's systematic exposure of institutional failures that the WNBA's growth narrative has been masking. Poor officiating, inadequate player protection, manipulative communication, unsustainable economic structure, and organizational incompetence all become visible when your primary distraction isn't available. The future implications extend beyond immediate ratings recovery. Even if Clark returns and viewership spikes temporarily, the underlying dependency structure remains unchanged. Networks now have data showing exact correlation between one player's availability and economic performance. That information changes leverage in every future negotiation. That brings us to the inevitable question that changes everything. Can the WNBA survive without Clark? Or have they built a billion-dollar marketing campaign disguised as institutional growth? The evidence suggests the latter. And the implications are staggering for anyone invested in women's professional basketball's future. The temperature of the online conversation reveals sophisticated audiences questioning fundamental league sustainability. These aren't casual critics. They're people who understand economics, business models, and institutional development, analyzing WNBA operations with professional-level detail. What happens next depends on whether the league recognizes this crisis as systematic rather than temporary. If they continue operating with crisis management mentality instead of addressing underlying structural problems, the dependency will only deepen. Clark's eventual return will provide temporary relief while masking the same institutional failures that created this crisis. The social intelligence shows audiences are ready for authentic analysis over marketing messaging. Content exposing institutional failures consistently outperforms official league promotion because people recognize genuine investigation versus PR campaigns. Here's what the other channels won't tell you about what comes next. The WNBA has approximately 30 days to demonstrate institutional capability beyond individual dependency. Playoff viewership without both rookie stars will provide definitive proof of whether historic growth represents league development or personality marketing. This investigation continues because the implications extend far beyond basketball. What we're documenting is how modern professional sports leagues succeed or fail based on institutional development versus individual dependency. The WNBA's current crisis provides a real-time case study in unsustainable business model exposure. I've been filtering through the noise to bring you the signals that matter. And what they're showing is systematic institutional failure disguised as temporary inconvenience. The billion-dollar growth narrative isn't just exaggerated, it's fundamentally fraudulent when examined against dependency reality. The digital breadcrumbs lead to one unavoidable conclusion. The WNBA built a house of cards with premium marketing, and one groin injury just exposed the foundation. Whether they address the underlying structural problems or continue crisis management will determine whether women's professional basketball has a sustainable future or remains dependent on individual transcendent talents, maintaining perfect health. This investigation continues as the situation develops. The economic intelligence, social media analysis, and network business model examination all point toward systematic problems that extend far beyond current season concerns. What's your take on the WNBA's dependency crisis? Do you think the billion-dollar growth narrative is sustainable? Or have we been watching institutional failure disguised as success? Drop your analysis in the comments. I read every single response, and the conversation continues there. If this investigation exposed connections you hadn't considered, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. The institutional analysis continues, and you don't want to miss future revelations about what's really happening behind the WNBA's marketing narrative. And if you found value in this deep dive investigation, share it with someone who appreciates authentic analysis over surface-level sports commentary. The truth about institutional sustainability versus individual dependency deserves wider discussion, especially when it affects the future of women's professional basketball. Until next time, keep connecting the dots, keep filtering out the noise, and keep demanding authentic analysis over marketing messaging. This is Jax Riley, and the investigation continues.